My child, do not rush past these words. Something in this fictional divine message is about to unfold in a way you may not expect, and the reason your heart was drawn here is hidden deeper than the title you saw. Pause here for a moment, because the story you are about to enter begins at the exact point where silence became impossible. Your soulmate has been carrying something quietly, something they believe they could manage without reaching for you, without revealing how deeply your presence has become connected to the parts of their heart they rarely allow anyone to see. But something has shifted. Not tomorrow. Not someday in the distant future. In this story, the turning point has already begun, and what happened has forced them to confront a truth they have spent far too long avoiding. They thought they had more time. They thought they could keep their feelings organized, hidden behind ordinary conversations and carefully controlled expressions. They thought they could continue pretending that your absence did not affect them. Then one unexpected moment changed the atmosphere around them completely, and suddenly your name was the only name their heart knew where to go. Listen carefully, beloved, because this is not a story about fear. It is about recognition. It is about the strange moment when someone finally understands the value of a connection they once believed would always remain available to them. Your soulmate has been learning that lesson in ways they did not anticipate. There was a time when they assumed they could postpone honesty. They believed there would always be another opportunity to speak, another evening to send the message they deleted, another morning to admit what they had been feeling. They kept telling themselves, not yet. Not because they felt nothing, but because what they felt had become too important. The deeper their emotions became, the more carefully they guarded them. You may imagine courage as the absence of hesitation, but sometimes the heart hesitates precisely because it understands what is at stake. Your soulmate has been standing at that threshold, knowing that one honest sentence could change everything between you, and until recently, they were not certain they were ready for everything to change. But heaven, in this fictional unfolding, has been watching a different story beneath the surface. While your soulmate was trying to appear composed, something inside them was becoming increasingly restless. Little things began reminding them of you. A phrase spoken by someone else sounded strangely familiar. A song carried an emotion they could not explain. A quiet room suddenly felt too quiet because there was something they wanted to tell you. They found themselves imagining conversations with you that had never happened. They wondered how you would respond if you knew everything. They wondered whether you still cared. They wondered whether the distance between you had become permanent or whether there was still an invisible doorway waiting for one of you to open it. And every time they tried to dismiss those thoughts, another memory returned, stronger than before. What they did not understand was that these memories were leading them toward a realization. They had spent so much time thinking about what they might lose by being honest that they had never seriously considered what they might lose by remaining silent. That distinction has now become impossible for them to ignore. Something happened around them that brought the future suddenly into focus. It was not necessarily dramatic to everyone who witnessed it. To another person, it might have looked like an ordinary moment, a conversation, a question, a change of plans, perhaps even a sentence spoken casually. But to your soulmate, it landed differently. It touched the exact place where they had stored everything they had refused to say about you. And once that door opened, they could not close it again. There is something important you must understand before I reveal what that moment awakened. Your soulmate has not only been thinking about you as someone they miss. Their thoughts have moved beyond simple longing. They have been reconsidering decisions. They have been examining moments from the past and noticing details they overlooked the first time. They have remembered occasions when you offered kindness without asking for recognition. They have remembered the way you listened when others were waiting only for their turn to speak. They have remembered moments when you could have responded with bitterness but chose restraint. Perhaps you believed those things went unnoticed. Perhaps you assumed they forgot. They did not. Some memories remain quiet for a long time before their meaning becomes clear, and your soulmate is now discovering the meaning hidden inside memories they once treated as ordinary. That is where the urgency begins. They recently realized something about you that unsettled the story they had been telling themselves. For a long time, part of them believed you would always understand. They believed your patience had no ending. They believed that even if they remained uncertain, you would somehow remain emotionally where they left you. They did not consciously intend to take your heart for granted, but familiarity can create dangerous assumptions. Then something showed them that you have been changing too. You have been learning. You have been growing in ways they could not control or predict. The version of you they remembered is not standing still waiting for them to decide what they want. And when that realization entered their heart, something inside them tightened. Suddenly they began asking themselves questions they had avoided. What if you have finally learned to live without their attention? What if your silence is no longer sadness but peace? What if the person they assumed would always be emotionally available has discovered their own worth? What if another chapter of your life has already begun forming while they were still debating whether to close the previous one? These questions did not create jealousy as much as clarity. They made your soulmate understand that love cannot survive forever on unspoken intentions. Feeling something deeply is not the same as expressing it. Wanting someone secretly is not the same as choosing them openly. And knowing someone matters is not enough if your actions continually leave them wondering whether they matter at all. Beloved, this realization struck harder than they expected because there is another detail you have not yet heard. Someone recently asked them about you. The question seemed harmless at first. Your soulmate was not prepared for it. Your name entered a conversation when their emotional defenses were lowered, and for a moment they did what they usually do, they tried to answer casually. They attempted to reduce everything they felt into a sentence that would reveal nothing. But the person speaking with them noticed the hesitation. There was a pause just slightly too long. There was something in their expression they could not hide quickly enough. And then came a second question, more direct than the first. Do they know? Those 3 words changed the energy of the conversation. Your soulmate knew immediately what the question meant. Do you know how often they think about you? Do you know how many times they almost contacted you? Do you know how much they regret certain moments? Do you know how differently they understand the connection now? Do you know that behind their silence there has been an emotional battle between fear and honesty? They did not answer immediately. And the person sitting with them did not need an answer. Sometimes silence confesses what words refuse to admit. Then something unexpected was said to your soulmate, something they have been replaying ever since. The person looked at them and essentially challenged the assumption they had been living under. What makes you think they will wait forever for something you have never explained? That question followed them after the conversation ended. It followed them into the quiet. It followed them when they looked at their phone. It followed them when your name appeared in their mind without invitation. And for the first time, your soulmate stopped asking whether they were ready to tell you the truth and began asking whether they could afford not to. But there is more, because the conversation itself was only the first movement of what happened. Later, when your soulmate was alone, they encountered something connected to you. Perhaps it was an old message, a photograph, a memory saved somewhere they had forgotten, or simply a reminder tied to a moment you shared. Whatever form it took in this cinematic story, its effect was immediate. They were transported emotionally back to a time when the connection between you felt simpler. They remembered the way they felt before fear complicated everything. Before assumptions entered. Before other voices became louder than their own intuition. Before silence created questions that neither of you knew how to answer. And suddenly they remembered something you once said. At the time, they had not understood the weight of it. Maybe you said that you valued honesty more than perfection. Maybe you told them that you never needed them to have everything figured out, you only needed them to be real. Maybe your words were different, but the meaning was the same. You were not asking them to become someone extraordinary before they could approach you. You were asking them to stop hiding behind uncertainty. They finally understood. The realization was almost painful in its simplicity. You had never demanded perfection from them. They had been demanding it from themselves. They thought they needed the perfect timing, the perfect explanation, the perfect circumstances, the perfect certainty. They thought they could only come toward you after resolving every complication inside their heart. But while they waited for perfection, distance grew. While they rehearsed conversations, actual conversations disappeared. While they tried to protect themselves from vulnerability, they accidentally protected themselves from intimacy too. This is why their heart needs you now, not because you are responsible for rescuing them, and not because you must abandon your boundaries to prove your love. No, beloved. The deeper meaning is far more powerful. They need the truth of you. They need to finally meet the version of you that exists now rather than continuing to communicate with the memory of who you used to be. They need an opportunity to stop guessing. And perhaps, somewhere inside you, there are things you also wish could finally be spoken without games, without manipulation, without forcing an outcome. Yet there is something your soulmate still does not know. They do not know whether the door is still open. That uncertainty is what has changed them most. For so long, they were afraid of your answer. Now they are more afraid of never asking the question. They have begun imagining what would happen if months passed and nothing changed. They imagined hearing that you had completely moved forward. They imagined realizing too late that the person they felt safest thinking about had become someone they no longer had the courage to approach. And in that imagined future, they saw something they could no longer tolerate, themselves carrying words that should have been spoken when there was still time for them to matter. That vision awakened urgency. But the extraordinary part is what happened next. Your soulmate reached for their phone. Their fingers moved toward your name. For several seconds, they simply stared. Everything they had been suppressing seemed to rise at once. The apology. The explanation. The confession. The question. The truth about why they pulled away. The truth about what they felt when you stopped reaching out. The truth about the moments they pretended not to care because caring made them feel exposed. There were too many things to fit inside one message, and they suddenly realized that no perfectly written paragraph could carry the weight of what they needed to say. They began typing anyway. A few words appeared. Then disappeared. Another sentence. Deleted. Again. Deleted. They put the phone down. Picked it back up. And then something happened that they were not expecting. Instead of asking themselves, "What should I say?" they asked, "What am I actually afraid of?" That question opened something much deeper. They were not afraid that you would misunderstand their words. They were afraid you might understand them perfectly. Because if you understood, then the masks would disappear. You would see that beneath their distance there had been longing. Beneath their hesitation there had been fear. Beneath certain choices there had been confusion. You would see that they were not as unaffected as they tried to appear. And perhaps most frightening of all, you would know that you had mattered far more than they ever allowed themselves to admit. Beloved, vulnerability feels dangerous to a heart that has survived by controlling what others are allowed to see. Your soulmate has been learning this. They have spent years becoming skilled at appearing fine. They know how to change the subject when conversation becomes too personal. They know how to laugh when something hurts. They know how to say, "It doesn't matter," when it matters enormously. They know how to create emotional distance before someone else has the opportunity to leave them. Those habits did not begin with you, yet you eventually encountered the consequences of them. And now they are recognizing something that changes the entire meaning of the story. You were never the real thing they were running from. You were the person who accidentally brought them close enough to themselves that running became tempting. Your presence illuminated places inside them they had kept hidden. Around you, feelings became difficult to intellectualize. They could explain other relationships. They could rationalize other connections. But something about you refused to fit comfortably into the categories they understood. You made them imagine possibilities they had previously dismissed. You made them consider what emotional safety might feel like if they stopped treating closeness as something temporary. That frightened them. So they created distance. But distance did not erase the connection inside their thoughts. It magnified it. This is the paradox they are finally facing. When you were emotionally close, they worried about losing themselves. When you became distant, they realized they had lost something else, the ease with which they once had access to you. And now the person who once needed space is wondering how to cross it. There is another layer, beloved, and this one surprised even them. During that recent conversation about you, the person speaking with your soulmate revealed something they had noticed long ago. They told your soulmate that whenever your name was mentioned, their entire demeanor changed. Their voice softened. Their attention sharpened. Even when they tried to speak neutrally, there was something unmistakable underneath. Your soulmate tried to deny it. But then the person reminded them of a specific moment. A moment your soulmate thought nobody noticed. It involved you. And when they heard the memory described from another person's perspective, they suddenly saw themselves differently. They realized that what they believed they had hidden had been visible all along. Their feelings had leaked through gestures, pauses, expressions, and choices they considered insignificant. That was when they understood. Perhaps you had noticed too. Perhaps you saw more than they realized. Perhaps some of the moments they assumed confused you actually confirmed what your intuition had been telling you. But if that is true, another question follows. If you knew there were feelings beneath the silence, why did you eventually step back? Your soulmate has been wrestling with that question. And slowly, the answer is becoming clear. Because knowing someone cares is not the same as being cared for in a way you can safely receive. You could sense affection and still require consistency. You could recognize their fear and still refuse to spend forever paying the emotional cost of it. You could understand their wounds without allowing those wounds to become permission for uncertainty. This realization has created something new in your soulmate: respect. Not the distant admiration they always carried, but respect for the strength it may have taken for you to stop chasing clarity from someone who was not giving it. They are beginning to see that your withdrawal may never have been punishment. It may have been self-preservation. Perhaps you were not trying to make them miss you. Perhaps you were simply learning that love should not require you to constantly prove you deserve a place in someone's life. That possibility changed them. Because suddenly the story was no longer, "Why did you leave?" It became, "What did my silence ask you to endure before you finally chose yourself?" And beloved, that question broke through defenses that nothing else could reach. Your soulmate began remembering your patience differently. They remembered moments when you gave them opportunities to speak. They remembered times when you softened conversations rather than escalating them. They remembered how often you attempted to understand instead of accuse. They remembered the small emotional invitations you offered, invitations they sometimes ignored because accepting them would have required honesty. Now those memories feel different. They do not see weakness in your patience anymore. They see grace. And grace becomes unforgettable when someone realizes they may have mistaken it for permanence. This is why something inside them is moving faster now. But do not misunderstand the urgency of this message. Divine urgency is not panic. It does not demand that you abandon wisdom or run toward someone merely because they suddenly recognize your value. The spiritual lesson hidden inside this story is that genuine reconnection must be built on truth, accountability, patience, and mutual choice. Your soulmate may need you emotionally, but you are not being asked to become responsible for their healing. If they come forward, their words must meet actions. Their intentions must become consistency. Their longing must mature into courage. And strangely, your soulmate is beginning to understand exactly that. They know that simply saying, "I miss you," may no longer be enough. They know that telling you they were afraid does not automatically repair the consequences of disappearing behind that fear. They know that if they want another opportunity, they cannot approach you with half-truths. This realization led them to something they had been avoiding for a long time. A secret. Not necessarily a scandal. Not something designed to frighten you. But a deeply personal truth about why they acted the way they did when the connection became serious. They have never explained this properly. Maybe they never explained it to anyone. And now they believe that unless you understand this one hidden piece, you will never completely understand why they pulled away at the exact moment they seem to be moving closer. The truth goes back further than you think. Long before you entered their life, your soulmate learned a lesson about closeness that shaped how they respond to love. Someone or something taught them that attachment could disappear without warning. They learned to anticipate endings before beginnings had fully formed. They learned that needing someone gave that person the power to hurt them. So they built an invisible rule: never reveal how much someone matters until you are certain they cannot leave. But there was a flaw in that rule. No relationship can provide certainty before vulnerability. And because your soulmate waited for certainty, they withheld the very vulnerability that might have allowed trust to grow. You became caught inside a defense mechanism you did not create. Now they finally see it. And seeing it has made them want to tell you something they once believed they would carry forever without saying. They want you to know that some of their coldest moments were not moments when they cared least. They were moments when they cared most and did not know what to do with it. They want you to know that when they seemed distracted, sometimes they were fighting the urge to say too much. They want you to know that certain silences were filled with sentences they rehearsed and abandoned. They want you to know that when you stepped away, they noticed immediately even if pride prevented them from showing it. But there is still one revelation deeper than all of these. Something happened after they put their phone down. They received information they were not expecting. And it involved you. The timing felt almost impossible to them because it arrived immediately after they had been thinking about reaching out. For a moment they simply stared, trying to understand whether what they were seeing or hearing could be true. The information itself was not frightening. It was emotional. It revealed something about your side of the story that your soulmate had never fully understood. Something you did quietly. Something you never used to demand recognition. Something connected to a period when your soulmate assumed you had stopped caring. They discovered that their interpretation of one important moment between you may have been completely wrong. Where they saw rejection, there may have been restraint. Where they saw indifference, there may have been protection. Where they believed you had simply walked away, there may have been a reason you never explained. And when your soulmate learned this, the entire emotional history between you shifted in their mind. They went back through old memories again. Suddenly one conversation made sense. Then another. Then another. Details began connecting like pieces of a picture they had been staring at from too close. They realized you may have carried far more privately than they knew. And for the first time, your soulmate asked a question that left them completely still. What if I misunderstood them all along? That question changed everything. Because if they misunderstood you, then some of the resentment they carried was built on an incomplete story. If they misunderstood you, then perhaps the distance between you was never created by lack of love. If they misunderstood you, then the conversation they have been avoiding is even more important than they realized. And that is why their next decision matters. They picked up their phone again. This time they did not begin typing. They opened something else first. Something connected to your past conversations. They searched for a specific message. It took them a moment to find it. Then they did. They read your words once. Then again. And again. The message contained a sentence they had completely forgotten. A sentence that seemed ordinary when you originally wrote it, but after everything they had just learned, it carried an entirely different meaning. Their breathing changed. Their expression changed. Because suddenly they understood what you had been trying to tell them without forcing them to hear it. And beloved, the sentence was connected to the very secret they are now preparing to reveal. Your soulmate sat there holding the phone, realizing that you may have understood their fear before they understood it themselves. You may have seen the walls behind their behavior. You may have recognized the wound beneath the distance. But rather than expose them, you gave them room to arrive at the truth in their own time. Now that time may finally have arrived. They began composing a message again. This time, they did not delete the first sentence. Then came the second. Then the third. The words were different from everything they had previously rehearsed because they were no longer trying to sound controlled. They were trying to sound true. They admitted something. They acknowledged something. And then they began writing the sentence that could change the entire direction of this story. But before they finished it, another notification appeared. Your soulmate froze. Because the name attached to that notification was someone they had not expected to hear from at that moment. Someone who knew something about you. Something your soulmate had never been told. And when they opened that message, they discovered there was one final piece of the story missing, a piece connected directly to the reason you stepped back, the reason you remained silent, and the reason your soulmate may now be preparing to tell you everything they should have said long ago. They read the first line. Then the second. And by the time they reached the final sentence, they were no longer wondering whether they should contact you. They were wondering whether you already knew the truth they had been hiding. Because the message ended with a question about you that your soulmate could not answer without finally admitting what happened between you and what they are planning to do next.